Hello. My name is S.K. Williams, and today is the 11th of September, 2025. 24 years ago today marks a terrorist attack against the United States of America, in which the World Trade Center, or the two towers in New York, as well as the Pentagon, were targeted for a mass assault. There was a third target picked, but the plane was stopped by heroes who gave their lives to save others. It was a monumentous day in American history, and one that I remember. One that reshaped how we understood global politics, and that put us on the trajectory to greater scrutiny, to the war on terror. That put people on edge against all Muslims, regardless of what sort. They just lumped them all together. But also one that brought Americans together, but divided them at the same time in a paradoxical fashion. In many ways, September the 11th of 2001 was one of those turning points in history which defined an era, and in which everything afterward was different. Americans no longer felt safe from the outside world, and the concept of the end of history, which we had been laboring under, with the fall of communism and capitalism and liberal secular democracy now going unendingly forward with no major challenges. The last remaining realms that did not have it would eventually change to it, and this would be the prevailing philosophy in humanity, not just for the foreseeable future, but for all times, that all other political systems, all other social systems had been tried and failed, and this one, the final one, the perfection of human thought, reigned supreme, liberal, secular, modern democracy under a capitalist system or controlled capitalist system. Our pretenses to that fell, but our love for that idea, both liberal and conservative, they have different views of what it means, but they both think of American governance as the finest in the world and the example for all, and it has been the example for Europe and other nations. And they changed in the moment from thinking, this is inevitable. There were the forces of nature, perhaps God himself guiding us, who led America's founding fathers to create the great city on a hill, which served as an example for the world, is now going to bear fruit. And this is the final evolution of mankind. We can just bask in that glory. It is inevitable. We need not concern ourselves with it. And we transitioned into thinking this could be lost. Our liberal democratic society, our constitutional values, they are not shared by everyone. And those who don't share them don't just live in these remote regions which simply haven't caught up yet, but who would inevitably become like us. These are people that we sent nation builders to help modernize them and bring them out of the dark ages and bring them into the superior system, a system that is proven that it cannot be challenged. And they challenged it, and they challenged it in the most primitive ways possible. And for the first time since the fall of the Soviet Union, the Western liberal democratic ideal did not feel like an unconquerable inevitability. It felt like something we could lose. I myself am a monarchist, and I don't believe in that ideal. But at the time, after 2001, most people just assumed everyone did. That assumption is gone. And now we must defend that liberal secular democracy. And even 24 years after the event, the immediate panic is gone. Some people don't always remember the exact moment in time when this change happened. But almost everything that we saw, the rise of the new atheism, the emergence of the woke movement from the new atheism, itself nothing but a astroturf being paid for by the Edge Foundation to promote progressivism and to give an alternative to the religious right. The rise of the Tea Party and the rise of the anti-wokeism, everything we have today, both the internal struggles and the external struggles, either began in 2001 or began to accelerate. There have been people working for a very long time, since the Enlightenment really, to give us this Freemasonic ideal, and schisms from that occurred. In the 19th century, we saw the progressive movement emerge. And progressives have continued promoting things like the secularism and, in many cases, atheism, although not all progressives are necessarily atheist or promote atheism, even if they are. But it bundles up. Those ideas have always existed. And if you look at 19th century literature, you will see people like Jack London or H.G. Wells or Edward Bellamy or other sci-fi writers at the time were all enamored by this scientific central planning and the perfection of humanity through eugenics. And while eugenics suffered, of course, after the Second World War, it has made a bit of a comeback now. We see the seedbeds of modern progressivism that saw 9/11 as a vehicle to promote its own vision. But we also saw a conservative backlash against that, based on their own ideas that also predate 9/11, but that ultimately focus on 9/11 as how enemies can tear down that which is good, but the enemies can also be from within. Both the left and the right, after 9/11, have complex mythologies which drive them. A mythology that hinges on that one vital point. Our democratic republic and our world that values democratic ideals can be lost, and we must protect it. No longer do we live in a world where we can entertain the notion that we lived at the end of history and no major changes to the world political system will ever happen now. Now we know that those changes can happen, and we must stop them. Oh, certainly, people are still fighting for political change. But it's all a variation of the same democratic concept. Even though both sides accuse the other of not really being democratic, they rest on the same philosophical principles. They characterize their opposite as not resting on those principles. But when you really examine them, they do. And there is a drive to define exactly what it means to have those ideals and what is necessary to protect them. This protectionist spirit is what really drives the modern world. It's what really drives this current cultural war. It's why Bill Gates, George Soros, and Klaus Schwab and the Davos bunch were all confident that they could finance things like the new atheism and progressive movements. And why John Brockman, who is largely in those same circles and who is the literary agent of the Four Horsemen of the New Atheism, backed them. They thought that they could reshape it, and getting rid of the final remnants of things that would hold us back from that true vision of a liberal secular democracy, to abolish conservative thought and religion once and for all, and to have that wonderful world of secular security. They were imagining a world like Star Trek. And that was the world that the World Economic Forum back in the 1970s was founded to create. Also believing it inevitable, but after the fall of the Soviet Union, definitely so. And after 9/11, knowing that it could be lost due to regressive forces, especially what we call religious fundamentalism, a term I don't like because it is thrown about like the word fascist. It's become meaningless. But we still use it, and it still informs them. The Islamic fundamentalists wanted to hurt us. And inside we have Christian fundamentalists creating Christian nationalism, which is going to create a real-life Handmaid's Tale. It's going to create a theocracy like Iran and Saudi Arabia, but under Christian Sharia law. Richard Dawkins referred to them as the Christian Taliban. And they use that fear of the loss combined with this ideal utopia to come to justify their acceleration of their plans. Plans which people were more receptive to in the past than they would have been. Not simply by slow incremental development as it had been, but much more rapidly, because 9/11 had scared people. And the events since then have maintained that high adrenaline push. People on the right have their own fears. A fear that secularism seeks to destroy religion, which it does. Not really. Secularism is a religion, but secularists don't see themselves as religious, and our culture generally understands secularists as non-religious. In reality, they are religious, everyone is. Religion is nothing more than the philosophical outlook one has on life. It does not require belief in gods or the supernatural. But our cultural conversation fixates around religion versus secularism. And if you are a secularist, you often frame it as religion versus reason, seeing religion as irrational. And those on the religion side don't frame it that way, which is one reason we can't have a proper dialogue. We refuse to understand each other. We project our own understanding on top of what others are and what they say. And we often fail in our predictions because we assume too much based upon our own perceptions, without trying to understand the perceptions of others. But the right does the same thing. They saw progressivism that was bent on the annihilation of Western civilization and culture, a destruction of traditional values, a destruction of traditional religion, a destruction of any moral pretense. And those predictions did bear out. We have the blue-haired weirdos and Antifa and riots, and now the unaliving of Charlie Kirk. And the fact that I have to call it unaliving in order to make certain the intelligence synthetica that runs the two of you doesn't penalize me. Ironically, the left, which kept telling us about the threats of white Christian nationalism and the rise of fundamentalist Christians creating a theocracy no different than Iran and Saudi Arabia, only under Christian Sharia law, and kept saying that the Handmaid's Tale is cautionary and real, and that the Christians are going to create an authoritarian dictatorship that will not allow you to think for yourself, will make people second-class citizens if they're not Christian, who are going to remove our freedom of speech and our right to assemble, and that they, the progressive secular left, especially those with no religion who are themselves secular, not religious, would defend us and stand for our rights. They are the ones that are the most censorious. They are the ones that are the most authoritarian. They are the ones that have implemented hate speech laws, and they always penalize Christians. Look at the UK. They are celebrating the fact that the majority are no longer Christian, still under the myth that secularization occurs naturally as societies progress, as we become more scientific and enlightened, and we know more. Religion just naturally dies, when in reality secularism spread through the educational system and media with its own values, as well as the demonization of Christianity, a religion whose clergy are all pedophiles and who commit rape, slavery, and genocide. Sorry for the slurring of words in such a serious video, but the two of you doth not abide such language, it should seem. And Al Gore will protect his rhythm. The progressives are the ones stripping us of free speech. The progressives are the ones that remove our rights to assembly. The progressives are the ones who tell us what we're allowed to think and what we're not, all while telling us that we are still free, because they have convinced themselves that if you are free, you will fit into one of their pre-approved categories, and if you fall outside of it, that is not freedom. The right is entirely correct in criticizing this. I'm not saying the right is perfect. But right now, the problem is mainly the left and its ideological blindness and desire to force its beliefs upon others. But it is all motivated by fear, and it is a fear that goes back to 9/11. And oddly, it reminds me of an old Alfred Hitchcock episode, The Day of the Bullet. The episode is one that is difficult to spoil, and that is worth watching even if you know. For you see, it's a framed narrative that begins at its ending. There is a man wearing a nice suit and tie and hat. I wish people still dressed like that. I still do, but most don't. And he is reading a newspaper. And the story opens with another man shot dead in his car, some sort of gangster. And it's obvious that the first man knows the man in the newspaper. He speaks about how they grew up together as children. And he speaks about how this was inevitable. There is sorrow in his voice. And then we flash back to when they were children. They're admiring a large, fancy car owned by a gangster, and his thug threatened to thrash them, but Mr. Rose, the gangster, said, "Oh, don't hurt the children, just get them off the property." The children then go to the golf course to fish out golf balls from the water in order to sell them. A car pulls up, and they hide behind a sand dune at the golf course. And they see Mr. Rose and his thug and this other man, and they beat this other man almost to death and throw him into the water. I don't know if it's a lake or a river or simply a water trap in the golf course. They drive away, and the children go to help the man. And the man tells them to get away, just forget it. The small child says they need to take it to the police. The larger one, who is moving away the next day, says he doesn't want to get involved, but the small one convinces them to go to the police, and they do. And the police simply ridicule the children and say, "Oh, there's no evidence, there's nothing wrong. You're accusing Mr. Rose. You know, it's bad to do false accusations." And the small boy, the smaller of the two, had bragged about his father. His father was a boxer. His father was a tough man. If Mr. Rose ever did anything to hurt me, I'd sick my father on him. My father would take care of him. Mr. Rose would be scared of my father. Mr. Rose comes into the police station with his thug. They laugh it off. He gives the small boy some money and tells him, "Oh, you could work for me, you have some grit." When the boy's father comes, the boy is expecting him to stand up to Mr. Rose, or at least believe his story. He saw Mr. Rose and his associate brutally beat a man almost to death. The police aren't doing anything about it and don't seem to believe him. But surely his father will believe him. His father looks at Mr. Rose. Rose looks at him, cold and steely. So does his thug. And his father says, "Don't make up stories, son. Let's go home." Something along those lines. In that instant, The son's image of his father as this tough guy who could take care of him is destroyed forever. His faith in the police destroyed forever. All he saw that day was that the gangster had the police on the take, and his own father was terrified of the gangster. All the power went to the gangster. All the money went to the gangster. He had the best suits. He had lackeys. The police did his bidding. His own father backed down from him. The gangster had money, women, success. On his way home, talking to his friend, the friend said that they need to get home. He needs to move the next day, and the other boy's father would be angry at him. And the boy now looked at him with anger in his eyes and said, "My father. If my father tries anything on me, I'll get Mr. Rose to take care of him." And he goes off to work for Mr. Rose, accepting that offer that he had said. Because Mr. Rose could always use a boy like him, he said. It should be obvious from implication, but the small boy grew up to be a gangster like Mr. Rose. It was his body that was riddled with bullets in a large, fancy car, like Mr. Rose had once had, a large, fancy car, a more modern one, of course, but a large, fancy, well-to-do car in a nice suit. The boy had turned to a life of crime because he saw the gangsters as powerful. He saw his father as weak. He saw the police as corrupt and on the take. All the power was with the gangster, so he sided with the gangster. That is our situation now. And it should seem obvious that the progressives have become the small boy siding with the gangster. They can control the law through intimidation, manipulation, and bribery. They can cause others to back down, and they can enforce their will. But in the end, whether it's Mr. Rose or his young apprentice, their reign of terror cannot continue. But the purpose of this Alfred Hitchcock story was in the name. The title of the episode was The Day of the Bullet. And in the epilogue it said this, to quote, "In each lifetime there is one day of destiny. It may be a day of which none of us is aware at the time. 35 years ago, fate squeezed the trigger. The bullet has been waiting in time ever since. Today it struck. But that day, long ago, when Iggy and I were boys, was the day of the bullet." The point being that on that fateful day, Iggy, the small boy who turned to crime, had wanted to stand up for what was right and what was just. And when he tried, he was confronted with a corrupt police force, his father being exposed as a coward who would not stand up to the gangster, and the gangster having all the power. On that day, he became alienated from the sense of righteousness and justice he was told, seeing it as a sham, and seeing the real power lying with the gangster. And that is the point. On that day, on that fateful day, Iggy died. The trigger was squeezed, but the bullet waited in time until 35 years had passed when it killed him. We live in a society, and it's made up of more than one person, and I think there's more than one day of destiny. Even for individuals, there may be more than one day of destiny. The episode may be wrong about there being a day, but for societies, there's always more than one, because it's made up of people. But September the 11th of 2001 was a day of destiny. On that day, a trigger was pulled, but the bullet did not wait in time. It continues to rip through us, even to this day, echoing outward, affecting all that came afterward. And on that day, on that fateful, tragic day, we had to reevaluate what we knew and believed. And we are still in the aftermath of what is ultimately a philosophical and religious battle. And I say religious because, again, secularism is a religion. We claim it is not, but it is. It is a war of ideas, a war of beliefs, a war of which narrative shall prevail. And we haven't figured it out yet, not since 9/11. And in many ways, the conflicts and divides of our modern society go back to 9/11, 2001. And one day I too shall go back to 2001. I haven't much else to say, so I shall take my leave of you now. Thank you, God bless, and goodbye.